Alright guys, Willem here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another video that I'll be running through Survivor history. Talking about one specific niche topic, and here, I'll be talking about the history of Survivor DVD covers, which might seem super random. This might not be something that most people have ever thought of. However, Survivor DVD covers have always been a thing that have interested me in the fact that obviously when seasons are released on DVD, they obviously end up producing a cover to the overall package, a cover that typically has an interesting trend to it. The fact that it usually contains 6 players from the season, which again, there's some seasons that don't really follow this trend, but the majority do, and I do think it'll be interesting to run through Survivor history, talk about the people that are on the cover, and for the ones that don't follow this format, talk about who I think should be on the cover. Again, I think there'll be some interesting things to talk about here, especially with some very bizarre choices at points. But anyway, let's start off from the very beginning. We're going to start off with Survivor Borneo, which I believe is the first season to be released on DVD, which again, you would think it would just go in chronological order, though it doesn't. But Borneo was, and again, it does follow the structure that we're going to be talking about. Again, 6 people on the cover here, with the winner being front and center in the top center, which again, there might be an exception to this later on, which I know people criticize. Obviously, like if you haven't watched the seasons before, it is kind of dumb that they are marketing these DVDs, essentially spoiling the season by having the winner and a lot of other major players on the cover, kind of spoiling who does become a major player. Again, it is kind of dumb that this is the way they did it, but I do think it leads to some intrigue. Again, we could talk through the thought process in who makes the cover. Now, straight up, I don't know who makes these decisions. I don't think it's Survivor production themselves. I think it's probably someone at CBS that makes this decision, but again, I still think it's interesting to talk about. But obviously, again, the winner, Richard Hatch, right in the center, as expected. Really, all of the final 4 are here in the Toggy 4, which makes a lot of sense, obviously, for the main characters of the season. The only 2 that aren't Toggy 4 here are Colleen and Jervis, which I think also makes sense. Obviously, they were the 2 farthest Pagongs to make into the game. Yes, this does screw over Sean, but I think these are actually solid picks. I think this is pretty much who I would have expected to be on the cover. All people that made it relatively far, all people that were pretty important to the season. But with that, we then get to Australian Outback, where we're already getting into some strange decisions here. Now, again, Tina, front and center, makes a lot of sense. Colby to her right, Jerry to her left, makes a lot of sense. 3 of the main characters of the season. Also 3 Oga Corps members, which I think in an ideal world, you would also balance out starting tribes, though, again, it's not always going to work out. And I think with Borneo in particular, again, having 4 of the Toggies made a lot of sense. But here, having 3 Kucha, 3 Oga Corps makes a lot of sense. The 3 Kuchas they pick here, though, are a bit strange. Now, we get Roger and Elizabeth. Now, again, makes sense. And they were the 2 Kuchas that made it the furthest. So again, not surprising they're on the cover. Though I think in retrospect, there is some strangeness in the fact that with future DVD covers, what they would do is put people that would return for future seasons on the cover, even if they didn't play that big of a role on their original season. So through that, again, like you would expect someone like an Amber to be on here instead, or someone like a Scoopin, though technically this DVD came out way before Philippines did. But again, the fact that Amber's not on here, again, I think makes sense for this season. Obviously, that would be a trend for later down the road. But the other choice here, again, is strange to me, and that is the fact that we do get Alicia, which again would follow this trend. Obviously, Alicia does come back for All Stars, but also, again, it feels random to me that she's here. Again, as much as obviously I don't like Michael Scoopin in the modern day, I feel like Michael Scoopin came off as a much bigger character on this season than someone like Alicia. Even Varner did. And it's not even like they were going for like an equal gender split, as Alicia obviously makes it 4 women and 2 men. So I really don't get why Alicia is here, especially if they're not going to put all the people that were on All Stars on the cover here. So again, don't know why exactly she's here. I guess maybe diversity. Maybe they were worried for that, though. Again, they won't be for down the road. So I mean, I don't know why Alicia is here, but it does feel a little bit random to me. Next for Survivor Africa, and this one's for the most part pretty by the numbers. Obviously, we've got the final 4. We got Ethan, Kim Johnson, again, right in the center on the top and bottom. I do like that. We got Lex and Tom. Makes a lot of sense. The other 2 picks, a little bit random. We got Kim Powers. Why is Kim Powers on here? I think that is random. Like, Kim Powers to me, like, did not come off as a major character on this season, to where the fact that she's here over T-Bird is a bit strange, especially considering T-Bird made it further. Now, T-Bird was severely under-edited on this season, but again, I think T-Bird definitely came off as a much more notable character than Kim Powers. So the fact that Kim Powers here is a bit strange. Also here we get Kelly Goldsmith, which I like. I like Kelly Goldsmith. I think she's a good pick. Still a little bit strange she was voted out as far back as she was, but it's not an egregious pick. I think Kelly Goldsmith is probably one of the better women picks to pick here if you're not going to put T-Bird on. So overall, I think this is a pretty solid DVD cover. Next, we got Marquesas, and I think this is another one. I think it's mostly fine. I mean, we got, again, the winner and the runner-up center. We got Vesepia and Aaliyah. We got Kathy, Pascal, Sean. So literally the entire final five, plus Boston Rob. And I know people obviously criticize, oh my God, they had to put Boston Rob and everything, but I think it's probably the right call. I mean, at the point that this came out, obviously Boston Rob was already a big name. This was post All-Stars. I think putting Boston Rob on the cover makes a lot of sense. He was also such a major character in the first half of the season, where, again, I just think it makes sense. I think maybe you could argue like John Carroll should be on here, maybe Gina, considering she also got a big edit, but really, I feel like this is about what I would expect to be on here. Again, the final five, plus a person that returns for All-Stars. Again, it makes a lot of sense to me. Next up for Thailand, and this one is a bit strange, as here we do have, again, the final two. We got Brian and we got Clay. Then we got Helen, again, big character of the season, makes a lot of sense. Then we got three pre-jurors, which is weird. We got Xian, who, again, comes back for All-Stars, so at least there's that. It makes sense why Xian is there. Then we got Rob Zabatnik, who I love Rob Zabatnik. He should be on the DVD cover. I'm surprised they put him on the DVD cover. I feel like he's not the type of person that they would usually pick, but again, I'm fine with that. Now, again, technically, did the likes of a Jake, a Ken, a Tad even play more of a factor on the season? Yes. But again, I love Rob Zabatnik. I'm okay with this. And obviously, I think Jake is probably the best pick to put on here. And I would assume they probably didn't want to put both Jake and Clay as two older guys on the cover. So maybe that played a factor there. The other person we have here is Gandia, who is a bit strange of a pick. Again, I like Gandia. I obviously am very sympathetic towards Gandia on this season, but she was the fourth boot, and her on the cover is strange. Now, like, truth be told, I don't know who you necessarily replace her with, as, I mean, I guess, like, Jan would be the answer, considering Jan got all the way to final three, but outside that, it's not like I'm dying for Penny to be on the cover, or Erin, or Stephanie Dill, and also just in terms of diversity, I think it makes it a lot better to put someone like Gandia here, but again, it does feel like a random pick, but I kind of do like it. Again, it feels like outside of the finalists, it does feel like a mostly spoiler-free cover here, to where I think you would come into this expecting the likes of Gandia, Rob Zabatnik, and Xian to make it far, only for them to not do so. So again, I think it's actually kind of interesting how this one's laid out. Next up, we got the Amazon, and this is pretty much one of the most by-the-numbers one here. I mean, it's literally just the final six. Again, Jenna, Matthew, Rob, Butch, Heidi, Christy. I think it's the most basic way to do it, though it's also probably the most fair way to do it. Now, again, would I swap people out here? Probably. I'd probably swap out Butch for Alex, considering I don't feel like Butch had that much of a role on this season. Or maybe even Dina, considering I thought Dina had a great role on this season. Though really, I feel like the rest of the picks are pretty solid. So again, no real complaints here. Next up for Pearl Islands, and this is where we get the funny one, where, again, usually the winner is front and center. This is the only one where they're not, where instead we have Rupert. And what's funnier too is, again, like the runner-up position, where again, early on they did do this of having the runner-up on the bottom center, something they changed moving forward, but they still have Lil in that position here, only for, again, Sandra to be relegated to the side. So again, that is funny, but again, the picks here are essentially the top six, just swapping out Dara for Rupert, which essentially means only one Morgan is on the cover, which is funny. Like, I don't think this is that egregious of a cover. Again, it's funny that Rupert's in the center, but outside that, I think it is a lot of the major characters here. I mean, you got to obviously have Rupert on here. Sandra, Lil, Fairplay, Burton, I think all make sense. I would say the Krista one is the one I'm most hesitant on. Now, I'm not saying replace her with Dara, considering I don't feel like Dara played a major role in the season either. Really, I feel like the next major character I would think of is Savage. But at that point, that would break up the gender distribution. So again, like, Krista's fine on here, but again, it does feel a little bit off in terms of like putting on the major characters of the season. But again, like, outside of swapping Rupert and Sandra, I don't really have a major gripe with this DVD cover. Next up for All Stars, and as you can tell right away, the design of this is radically different. We don't have the typical 6-person format. Instead, it is every player being on the cover here, kind of organized in a very strange way, to where placements do feel just kind of random here. And while it is unique, and they do continue this with All-Star seasons, at least some of them, to just put everyone on the cover. And while this is probably the most fair way to do it, again, to put everyone on the DVD cover, which probably should have been done with all these other seasons, I kind of do miss the old format, as I do think it's more fun to speculate who should be on there and who would be on there. And again, screw it. We're going to talk about who I think would be on here. Again, obviously, Amber and Buster Rob are pretty obvious. Rupert has to be on here. After that, I think it's a little bit more rocky. I think you probably have Lex. I mean, Lex is obviously such a major character on this season, especially with his downfall. I think he would be on here. I think you would probably put on Xian to add to the diversity of it all. Considering outside of that, again, this is obviously not a diverse cast in the slightest. And I think for the final slot, I think you would debate between a few people. I think probably like Jenna, Alicia, Big Tom. I don't know if they would have just said screw it and gone like really far back and putting in like a Colby or a Richard to try to sell more DVDs. I could definitely see that world as well. I mean, because like straight up again, like obviously the point of these covers is to show the major people, to remind people of who's on this season, to try to get them to buy the DVD. So again, if you're limiting it to 6 people, I mean, I think you're going to want to try to get the bigger names on here to where I could definitely see them going for Rich, I think in particular over Colby, just due to obviously the status as this being all-stars and wanting the first winner on the cover. But really all these placements are pretty up for grabs outside of Boston Rob, Amber, and Rupert, who I think are the big locks here. Next for Vanuatu, and again, we return to the typical format from this point for a while after this. So with Vanuatu here, again, pretty baseline here. We just get the final 6. And again, I think this is fine. I mean, I think all of the final 6 were pretty good. I think all of them were major players on this season. Obviously, Chris, Twyla, Scout, Eliza, Julie, and Amy. And the overall placements of them on the cover are a bit strange, where why is Amy in the bottom center? I mean, she was obviously a major character on this season, but again, you would think they would put like Twyla instead. Outside that, again, not anything egregious here, kind of by the numbers. Would I argue for potentially putting on someone like a Rory or a Sarge? Potentially, but I think this is a fine cover. I think this is pretty much what I would have expected. Next up for Palau, and Palau is also mostly by the numbers. We do have the final 4 on the cover in Tom, Katie, Ian, and Jen, which again, I think is fair. I mean, Jen was not a major character on this season, which I think is maybe a minor issue, but again, I don't really have much of a grievance with her being here. So she's like, who am I going to replace her with? With like Janu or Karen? I mean, I think Jen's fine. Then obviously the other 2 spots end up going to the 2 last oolongs. We got Stephanie and Bobby John, who obviously do later return for a following season. So again, it does follow that trend as well. Again, I think that's the right choice. My question is, why is it Bobby John in the bottom center? Like, that's super random to me. Why not Stephanie? But really outside that, again, I think this is pretty much by the numbers of what I would have expected. You would think that they want to highlight the oolongs that get taken out a bit earlier while also having the people that made it to the end of the game. Again, I think it's pretty much as typical as you can get for this season. Next up for Guatemala, and Guatemala here is a little bit strange. We do also have the final 3. We got Danny, Rafe, and Stephanie. Makes a lot of sense. We also have Bobby John on here, which, I mean, a little bit strange, but I mean, considering this was a season based around captains and Stephanie and Bobby John were the captains, again, it makes sense. The other 2 picks, again, I think are also pretty solid. We got Judd and we got Gary. I think 2 major characters on the season. Makes a lot of sense to have them. And overall, like a solid cover here. I think it is kind of still weird to have Bobby John on here. Though at the same time, again, they weren't going to put Lydia. Lydia was pretty under-edited. Cindy, I think, could have been fun to put on here, but again, not that surprised they didn't. I think as a whole, again, it's not that far away from what you would expect coming into this, to where it's essentially 6 of the more notable people that made the merge here. Next up for Panama, and this one's funny because, like, as you can see, and a lot of the big names are here. 5 of the top 6 are on here. That's cool. Aris, Danielle, Terry, Sari, Shane. Makes a lot of sense. Now, again, Courtney not being here is a bit strange. I do think I would have preferred Courtney be here. But, I mean, the fact that they didn't go with Courtney, it's like kind of understandable. But the person they did go with here is Bob Dog for some reason, which is like random. Like, this is definitely one of the most random picks in my opinion, considering Bob Dog, again, had a great like early edit. I do love Bob Dog early on in the season, but even then, he's not like a major character earlier on. And like the fact that they picked Bob Dog here over a lot of people, again, like over Courtney, over Bruce, over even Austin, who had a pretty big edit. Even Dan Barry, I think, is like really weird. Again, why is Bob Dog here? And it doesn't really make sense, like in terms of like gender split. Again, it makes it 4-2. Having Bob Dog here also makes it 5 Kasaya, 1 Lamina. Again, it is just really funny that they pick Bob Dog, as it's just such a random pick. But outside of that, it's kind of who you would expect. Next up, moving on to Cook Islands, and this one is pretty much by the numbers. I mean, looking at it, it is 6 of the top 7. The only person of the top 7 not here is Adam. Makes sense. You obviously got Yule, the winner of the season. You got the 3 people that returned from Micronesia in Parvati, Ozzy, and Penner. Ozzy and Penner obviously being massive characters on this season. Parvati still made some impact. Then we obviously get the 2 other I24 members in Becky and Sundra. Again, it makes a lot of sense. I think there could be an argument, okay, Candace should be on here. I think Candace was a bigger character than Sundra and Becky. Same thing in Nate. I think you could argue Nate should be on here, but again, I think it's always better if you just keep it to the people that made the end of the game. Though again, I think it's probably better and more fair this way to have the people that made it towards the end of the game. And also, I think the addition of Candace on here is probably not a great look to have over to half the people on your DVD cover be from the white tribe on a season broken up by race. So again, like, I think overall it works out the way it is. I think it's fine as it. Next up for Fiji, and this one is a little bit strange as well. We got the top 4, which again makes a lot of sense. Earl, Cassandra, Dreams, and Yao Man. We then get Alex and Garita, who again, like, I think most people would probably question, but I mean, Alex was a major character here. I mean, coming out of his boot, he had the top confessional count of the season, so again, I think it makes a lot of sense. But then we got Michelle Yi, and Michelle Yi is random. I don't know why they picked Michelle here over even like Stacy, who makes it a lot further than her. I mean, it's not like an egregious pick. I think it's fine, but like, again, like, she does get pretty under-edited. Considering she is also like a relatively early boot, it does feel weird they end up going with her over some other potential options. But I mean, again, we did need another woman. The likes of Earl, Yao, Alex, and Dreams were near locks to where, again, even Cassandra's kind of a questionable pick, considering like she was barely on the season also. But really, I mean, again, I think it comes down to just the under-editing of the women on this season, where I guess Michelle Yi is a decent pick, but it does feel a little bit random on paper. Next up for Survivor China, and this one is mostly by the numbers. I mean, we got 6 of the top 7. The only person not in the top 7 is Denise, which is a bit of a slight on Denise, but I think most of these picks make sense. Again, Todd, Courtney, Amanda were the final 3. PG was a big underdog. James, obviously massive character that comes back for following season. Eric is a bit weird. Now, again, I think I would probably go Denise over Eric. Though also in an ideal world, again, I would split it pretty equally gender-wise to where I guess through that I would pick Eric over Denise. And I don't know if you really want to reward John Robert by putting him on the cover, to where I think John Robert was obviously a much bigger character on this season, but also it's John Robert. So, I mean, like, I guess it's fine, but it does feel a bit strange when you first see it here. Next up for Survivor Micronesia, and this one's a bit all over the board, where obviously we got the top 3. We get Parvati Mandasuri, makes a lot of sense. After that, we got Eric, makes a lot of sense, major character this season. Then we got Ozzy, again, a little bit further back, a little bit questionable, but again, not that egregious. And then we got Penner, which it's like, why? Again, I love Penner. Again, one of my favorite characters in Survivor history, but also, he should not be on the cover of Survivor Micronesia. He's barely on the season. He's gone by episode 5. Again, the fact that they picked Penner over the likes of Natalie Bolton, even over Alexis, over James, who is the fan favorite of the season, again, it's insane to me that they picked Penner. I don't know why they picked Penner. It feels bizarre, but I guess that's the route they went. I guess they just love Penner. Again, Penner's on literally all of the DVD covers of the seasons he's on, but again, I don't know why he's on this one. Next up for Gabon, and Gabon is pretty typical. Again, 6 of the final 8. The only 2 that aren't here are Susie, which makes a lot of sense considering how underrated she was, but also Crystal, which I think is a bit of a miss. Now, I don't know who you take off, as I do think the 6 on the cover here are pretty strong. Again, you got Bob, the winner. You got Sugar, who's a massive character on the season. You got Maddie, who also comes very close to winning. You got Kenny, who also was a big character. You got Corinne, who comes back for Caramoan, was also in consideration to come back for Heroes of Villains. And you got Randy, who obviously was a big character and comes back for Heroes of Villains. So, like, I don't know who you cut here. I think maybe if you were to cut one person, it would be Maddie for Crystal, but though even then, I don't think that makes that big of a difference, really. So, I think this is probably just one where there's not enough slots. Again, just 6 people is not enough, but I would have probably tried to fit Crystal onto this one, but it's kind of fine as is. Next up for Tocantins, and this one's kind of funny, as we do get the Jolabal 3. They don't put Aaron on here because I guess they don't like Aaron. We then get Coach, obviously. We then get Tyson, obviously. Again, like Tyson, Coach, JT are on the top. Again, all people that come back for Heroes of Villains. Makes a lot of sense. The other person on the cover here is Sierra, which, again, Sierra was a big underdog figure and someone that was, again, near fan favorite on this season. Like, I personally would have put Aaron on. I think Aaron should have been on here, personally, over Sierra, especially considering she gets so close to making it to the end. But again, it's not really an egregious choice, though. But again, just one that I don't personally agree with, putting Sierra on here. Next up for Samoa, and Samoa is a little bit strange here, where we obviously got the winner in Natalie. We then also got Russell. We got Shambo, who's one of the biggest characters of the season. And then we also got Laura and Russell Swan as two people that later return. And all those spots make sense. And Laura Moret, I think if it wasn't for the fact that she did return, would be a somewhat random pick. But also, if you're going to pick one of the glue women, I think it makes sense to pick Laura. Obviously, this came out before Second Chance, to where the likes of Monica was probably not really at the forefront. And with that, the last spot on the cover here ends up going to Jason, which I think is fine. Again, if you're picking between Jason and Mick, I would personally go Jason. I think the only reason to pick Mick would be because he made the final 3. And beyond that, I just feel like the issue of putting Galoo members on here is the fact that they were just so under-edited. Now, again, I think maybe you could put Brett on here because he did come so close to winning and almost won fan favorite. But I do think most of the choices here do kind of make sense, especially if you follow the trends that they typically keep with these DVD covers. Now we're getting to Here's His Villains, which, again, follows the typical format, which is a bit strange. Again, with returnee seasons, we do see them end up putting everybody on the cover at multiple instances, which we'll later talk about. But Here's Your Villains, they just did the typical DVD cover. Now, in terms of the picks here, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have the top 4, Sandra, Parvati, Russell, Jerry, perfect picks. Makes a lot of sense. You then get Rupert, which, again, made it very far. Makes a lot of sense. Essentially, it means that 5 of the top 6 are here. The person not in the top 6, though, that's here, is Boston Rob. Which, again, I think it makes sense in the sense that obviously Boss Rob is one of the biggest names in Survivor history. I think they want him on the cover to sell the DVD, but it is funny. And again, would it be my pick here? No, I would probably just go Colby, or if not Colby, then probably someone like JT, who I think plays a major impact on this season. Even Coach, I think would make more sense than Boston Rob. But again, like, he obviously is a big name. He also obviously comes back and wins Redemption Island by the point this DVD comes out. So again, it makes a lot of sense why they put him on the cover here, though it is kind of a funny choice when you don't look at it with any context. But next up, we're moving on to Survivor Nicaragua, where this one I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, we got 3 of the top 4 in Fabio, Chase, and Holly. Obviously, Fabio the winner. Holly, obviously a major character as well. Chase, I think, is probably here just as the better of the 2 evils, where it's pretty rare that you don't see at least 2 of the finalists on the cover. And I think in the choice between Chase and Sash, they definitely would have chosen Chase. As against Sash, I don't think was particularly well liked by production or CBS. And even beyond that, I think Chase obviously has his music career to where maybe they're thinking there's a chance that people see Chase Rice on this cover and buy it. Beyond that, it's 3 of the other major characters of the season. We got Jane, we got Brenda, we got Marty, which might feel a bit strange, especially because Brenda and Marty were booted relatively early. However, again, Brenda does return for Caramoan, so that does make sense. Marty is a fun choice. I'm happy Marty's on the cover. And truth be told, it's not that surprising considering, like, who are they going to replace him with? I guess, again, they could have put Sash, but again, I don't think they like Sash. And again, Jane was fan favorite, so it makes a lot of sense. I think I probably, if it was my own personal cover, I would probably try to fit in Nyanka. But, I mean, it's very clear why they didn't put Nyanka on here. So, again, I think considering all the context around this cover, it does make sense why they picked the people they did. Next up for Redemption Island. And this one seems very random on paper, but once you, again, pick it apart, I think it makes a lot of sense. You obviously got Boston Rob, the winner of the season. You got Philip, obviously major character and also one that returns for Caramoan. You also got Andrea, also makes it relatively far and also returns for Caramoan. You got Russell, who, again, funny that Russell's on here, but also this was a captain season. It was Rob versus Russell. Russell's obviously one of the biggest names in Survivor history. So again, makes sense why they put him here. Matt Elrod is here, which again, one of the bigger characters of the season. Makes a lot of sense why he's here. Would not bat an eye at it. Then we got Francesca, who's the first boot. And again, the reason why she's here is because of Caramoan. She was brought back for Caramoan. They wanted to put her on the cover because she's a returnee. It makes sense. I obviously, like, in an ideal world, if we don't add in all this context, I would probably swap out Francesca for even like Natalie Tenorelli would be better, or Ashley Underwood. Either one I think would be fine. And obviously I'd probably take out Russell as well and maybe put in someone like a Ralph or even like a Mike Chisel. Considering also something to mention here is that 5 of the 6 people on the cover here are Ometepe, which is also kind of funny. But still, again, this is one that does definitely feel very influenced by future seasons, other context around the season, which makes the choices for the cover here feel a bit random at first. Next up for South Pacific, and this one's pretty much by the numbers. I mean, it's the entirety of the top 4 plus 2 of the returnees for Caramoan. Makes a lot of sense. Now, there's obviously a big returnee that's not here, which is Brandon. Though, again, considering the circumstances of what happened in Caramoan, I understand why they wouldn't put Brandon on the cover. Though it does feel a bit strange they put Albert on the cover, considering, like, Albert and Sash, I think, are kind of not that similar, especially from Survivor Productions' point of view. Mind you, again, I don't think it was Survivor Production that put these together. I think it was probably someone on CBS's end or through that. Again, like, Albert did make the end, so at least there's that. Again, it does make sense to put him on here over the likes of Rick. But yeah, I think I would have liked to see someone like a Jim Rice make the cover. I think that would have been fun. But overall, again, this cover just makes a lot of sense. Top 4 plus 2 other returnees. It's kind of what you would expect. Next up for One World, and this one's a bit all over the board, as we obviously have the winner in Kim. We then also have another finalist in Chelsea, and then the rest are just scattered all over the place. We have Tarzan, who, again, I like Tarzan. I'm happy with him here. We have Kat, who later returns for Blood vs. Water, so it makes a lot of sense. We have Troyzan, who is obviously a major character on this season. Very clearly, they have been wanting back at this point. I believe this came out before Game Changers, but obviously he was always in the running. And again, it makes a lot of sense for them to put him on the cover. But then bottom center, taking up a good chunk of the cover, is Monica Culpepper, which is funny. Like, why? Again, I know why Monica Culpepper is here. Obviously, it's because of Blood vs. Water, but also it's funny that she's literally right in the center and takes up a good chunk of the cover. And like straight up, I think a big miss here is the fact that Sabrina is not on this cover. I don't know how they didn't put Sabrina on here. Like even over Chelsea, like realistically, both of them should be on here, but if you are going to have only one of the two, I don't know how they didn't pick Sabrina over Chelsea. Now, again, I'm not disagreeing with the rest of the picks. I do think Troyzan, Kat makes sense. To be honest, Tarzan could probably go, as much as I love Tarzan. Maybe swap him out for Sabrina. I guess at that point, they wanted to have at least 2 men, right? I should mention the fact that Colton's not on here, despite him returning later on, but there's obvious reasons for that. I just think as a whole, I just feel like Sabrina not being here feels like a massive miss, but the rest of the picks do kind of make sense. Next up for Survivor Philippines, and this is a cover that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at it, it's 6 of the top 7. Only one top 7 not here is Carter. Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. It's pretty much who I would expect to be here. Obviously, in an ideal world, I mean, we wouldn't have Scoopin on the cover. Maybe swap him out with like a Pete or a Jeff Kent. But, I mean, as the season came out, you would expect 6 people to be on the cover. I think this is the 6 people you would expect. So, again, I do think it makes a lot of sense here. Next up for Caramoan, and this one's all over the board. I will say right away, really funny that literally all of them are returning players. Not a single fan made the cover of Fans versus Favorites, which to be fair is a similar thing with the original Fans versus Favorites, where only Eric made it on the cover of that. But here we literally have none. And also the choice they end up having for returnees here is a little bit strange. Obviously we have Cochran and Don, makes a lot of sense. They made it to the end. Brenda is, again, a little bit questionable. I mean, she was pretty purple for most of the season and has a big exit. I guess that's enough, but again, kind of a strange choice. In my opinion, again, Andrea's fine. I think her being here makes sense. I'm also not like dying for it either. Malcolm being here makes a lot of sense. Obviously makes a big splash before he leaves. And then obviously Philip is a big character where he hogs up a lot of screen time. So it makes sense. Now, in ideal world, again, I would like to probably have at least Reynold on here as the fan representative and probably swap him out with Andrea or Brenda. I think in ideal world also you'd probably have Sherry on here, but it's not really a necessity to me. But again, I think this is one that it does make sense who they pick, but I just feel like the fact that there's no fans is just kind of a ridiculous concept to where I'll at least swap one of them out here. Next up for Blood vs. Water, and this one is ridiculous. Like, what is this cover? Again, only one of the finalists is on this cover in Tyson. No Monica, no Jervis, despite Monica again being on the cover of One World. On that, you do have Tina, who obviously comes very close to winning the game. I personally would probably pick Monica over Tina for this cover, though. Again, Tina being here is not that egregious. Sierra's on here. Makes a lot of sense. She returns for Cambodia. She's obviously a big character. Same thing with Vetus. Big character, returns for Cambodia. Would he be like a lock for this cover for me? Not really. But again, the fact that he returns for Cambodia does make sense. Hayden, obviously big player here. Makes a lot of sense that he's on the cover. But then we have Candace. Why is Candace here? Again, Candace is gone halfway through the pre-merge. It's like, why is Candace on the cover? It's funny too, because she's literally not even on the cover of the 2 other seasons she's on. It's her worst performance that she's on the cover for. And again, like, how do you not have Monica on here instead? Jervis should probably be on here also. I would even argue Brad Culpepper should be on this cover more than Candace. Again, it's weird that Candace ended up making the cover here. And really just as a whole, again, it does feel like a very random cover. One where, again, 2 of the finalists aren't even here. And I'll also say, not the greatest diversity-wise either. Not a single POC made this cover, despite there being a very obvious one they could have put on. So again, I really don't know what they were doing with this cover. It does feel bizarre to me. Next up for Cagayan, and I mean, this one's pretty by the numbers. I mean, we do have 5 of the top 6. Only person not here is Trish, and that person swapped out by Sarah Lucina, who obviously comes back for Game Changer. Makes a lot of sense. I think this is pretty much what I would expect from this cover. I mean, essentially through this, you have all the people that return for future seasons, Tony and Sarah for Game Changers and Winners at War, and Wu, Cass, Spencer, Tasha, who return in Cambodia. Again, it is 100% by the numbers, not really much to really say about it. I don't even think there's that much you would really swap out here. Even though I do like Trish as a character, I feel like Sarah being here definitely makes a lot more sense. Next up for Juan del Sur, and this one makes sense, but it is also a little bit funny. We also got Natalie Anderson, makes a lot of sense. We obviously got Jeremy, Keith, and Kelly Wentworth, who, again, makes sense because they returned for Cambodia. I will say, Kelly Wentworth being on the cover of Juan del Sur does feel a bit weird considering how minor of a character she is here. But again, if we're following previous rules, it does make sense. And then the last 2 spots go to John Mish and Josh, which also makes sense. Josh was a major character for first half. His rivalry with Jeremy was a major storyline this season. It does make sense. John Mish being here also makes a lot of sense. He was a major character towards the end game. Now, again, I think I probably would have tried to get one of Jacqueline or Missy on here to get one of the other finalists. And the person I would swap them out with is Kelly Wentworth, considering I just don't feel like she played that much of a role in this season. But outside of that, I do feel like this is actually probably about right. This is kind of who I would expect. But again, the addition of Kelly Wentworth does feel random at first. Next up for Worlds Apart, and this one is a little bit strange. I mean, we do obviously have Mike, Carolyn, Rodney, 3 of the top 4. That makes sense. No Will, makes sense. We also got Shireen and Joe, people that come back for Cambodia. Makes a lot of sense. The next choice is Jen. And I think it makes sense on paper. I think without context of the rest of the series, I think Jen being on here makes sense. She was a big character early on. I think out of the people that get booted after her, I don't know who I would actually swap her out with. And I love Dan Foley as a character, but there's no way they were going to put Dan Foley on this cover. However, obviously Sierra does end up returning from this season to be on Game Changers. So I think you probably would have expected her to be on here over Jen. Especially considering I don't believe this DVD came out until years after Game Changers aired. So I do feel like it's strange they didn't put Sierra on here just to follow their own trends. But again, I think Jen being here does make sense. Next up for Cambodia. And this is what I was referring to earlier, where again, it is a returnee season. And again, in certain returnee seasons, they just decide to put everybody on the cover, as they did here. I will say something strange I don't particularly like about this one is the fact that these are all pictures from their original seasons, where really even some of these are literally just the cast photos that were used for previous DVD covers, which is actually really funny. Which again, like, I am okay with having everyone on the cover. I think that is the most fair thing to do, but I don't love the fact that these are all old photos of them. Why didn't they get the Cambodia photos of them? Why didn't they do that? So I just find this cover a bit strange. Now again, if we were to do a proper cover, who are we going to put on here? I mean, I think you do have all the final 3. I think all 3 of them had major impacts on the season. Jeremy, Spencer, Tasha. I think you do have Kelly Wentworth, obviously, major character on the season. After that, I think you could probably debate a bit. I think they would probably put Joe. Joe obviously returns for Edge of Extinction. He obviously was a big character on the season. I think they would go Joe. The 6th spot, I think, is a bit contentious. I could definitely see multiple routes for them to take. I think they could go the likes of Sierra or the likes of Varner, considering their later return for Game Changers, but at the same time, you don't want Varner on there, do you? So through that, I think Sierra probably becomes the front runner for that spot, but I could also see a world where you could put like an Abby as a big character. They could put Steven, who was also a big presence on the season. But if I were to guess, I think they would lean towards the Sierra side of things, where again, at that point, it would essentially just be the top 4 plus 2 people that return for future seasons. Again, I do think it makes a lot of sense. Next up for Kaoh Rong, and Kaoh Rong here is kind of what you would expect. I mean, it is 4 of the top 4, which again, makes sense that they would put those people. And Michelle, Aubrey, Ty, and Sydney. Obviously, Michelle's the winner. Ty and Aubrey return for future seasons. Sydney was a big player. Debbie is on the cover here as well. Again, while it is a little bit random, the fact that she was voted relatively far back, she obviously does return as well. The next person on here is a bit of a surprise to me, and that's Kyle Jason. And again, I think Jason's a great character. I'm kind of happy he's on the cover. I do think he is more of a representation of this season than the person I would have expected to be on here, which is Caleb. Which again, Caleb does return for Game Changers. I would have expected them to put him on the cover because of that. Again, they went the Jason route instead, which I think is perfectly fine. Overall, pretty decent cover here, kind of around who I would expect to be here. Next up for Millennials versus Gen X. And again, this one's pretty by the numbers as well. Now, I will say the one thing that It does feel a bit weird that there's only one Gen X member on this cover, but I mean, that's pretty representative of the season. But again, like the picks here, Adam, the winner, makes sense. David, obviously massive character on the season, someone that came back for Edge of Extinction. Zeke and Michaela are on here as people that come back for Game Changers. And while Michaela, again, might be a little bit of a random pick for the cover of this season, I do feel like, again, it makes sense considering the context. And then we got Hannah, who, again, made it to the end, big character, makes sense. And then Jay, who is also a big character as well. Like, I really don't feel like I would swap anyone out here. I feel like this is pretty much who I would want. I think the only way I would swap out people here is if I wanted to put more Gen X people, and through that maybe I would try to fit in someone like a Jenna Lewis, but even then the field there isn't the greatest. So again, like I do feel like for the most part I feel pretty okay with this DVD cover. Next up for Game Changers, and this one's a bit strange. I mean, we do obviously have Sarah and we do have Brad, obviously two of the final two. The fact that they skip out on Troyzan, again, makes sense based on the season's edit. We do have Ty, and we do have Suri, again, two people that make it very far, two big characters on the season. Makes a lot of sense. We then get Andrea, and this seems weird to me. Again, Andrea was pretty under-edited for a lot of the season. It does feel weird that they put Andrea here instead of Zeke, who obviously plays a much bigger factor onto the season. And you would think that considering how much Survivor tried to hype up the Zeke storyline, that they really would want Zeke on this cover. So again, I feel weird that they didn't put Zeke on. And the other person they put on here is Sandra, who again was obviously a relatively reboot. I think it still makes sense to put Sandra on here though. Again, if you wanna put the biggest names on the cover, I think Sandra makes sense. Again, I think the big glaring hole from this cover here is Zeke, who I think definitely should have been there instead of Andrea. Next up for HHH, and this one is mostly by the numbers. We got obviously the top four. We got Ben, Chrissy, Ryan, Devin, makes a lot of sense. And then instead of the likes of Dr. Mike and Ashley, we then have Lauren and Joe. I think it makes sense. I mean, again, it sucks for someone like a Dr. Mike, but I do think Joe just was a bigger character on the season. And then for someone like an Ashley, she was just a bit under-edited to where, again, Lauren was just a bigger character. I think this makes a lot of sense. I don't have major grievances with any of these choices. I think this is kind of who I would expect. Next up for Ghost Island, and also, I think this is pretty much what I would expect. I mean, we do have the top three here in Dom, Wendell, and Laurel. Makes a lot of sense. Beyond that, we then have three of the other major characters of the season. We have Donathan, Kellen, and Michael. I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, this was a season that was very lopsided editing-wise, and these were six of the major characters of the season, where other people that made it far simply just did not get that big of an edit. I mean, people like an Angela, people like a Seabass, people like a Chelsea. Again, like out of the people that made it far, these were the people that got edits. So again, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, again, personally, I think it would have been cool to have Chris Noble on here, but it makes a lot of sense why they picked the people they do here. Again, I think this is a pretty standard grouping. Next up for David versus Goliath, and I also feel like this is also another pretty standard grouping. We got the winner in Nick, alongside the final three in Mike and Angelina, and then we got three of the other major characters. We got Davey, Christian, and Gabby. Now, I think maybe you can have some grievances that like Kara Kay or Allison aren't on here, considering they made it further than these three. But I think these three were just bigger characters all around. And really, yeah, I don't think I would really swap out anybody here. I think maybe you can argue that like Dan was a bigger character than someone like a Gabby on the season, but I still personally would pick Gabby to be on here, especially considering the lack of women on the cover already. I do think this is just overall a pretty solid choice for who to pick here. Next up for Edge of Extinction, and this is a pretty unique cover for a couple things. One, this is actually the last DVD cover to follow this 6-person format. Beyond this, they will end up attempting different other formats. However, and this is the last of the original format, and it is one that is a bit strange considering the 6 people on the cover here are all from the same starting tribe, which the fact that they just like completely isolate Kama from this cover is bizarre, especially considering a lot of them make it far. So it is really funny how this cover is laid out, where obviously Chris is here, makes sense. Rick Devens is here, that does make sense. I think the other choices are all curious choices. I mean, Kelly and David are here, who were returning players and were big characters on this season, so I don't have major grievances with that. And I think I definitely would have stuck with Kelly, but I think David I would be a bit more wonky on. Lauren O'Connell is here, which I think is fine, especially considering she made it to Final 5. I think it makes sense. But then War Dog is here, which also feels very random. I mean, I think it is a shame that someone like a Gavin or Julie aren't here. Even though, again, Gavin was pretty under-edited and wasn't particularly entertaining, he still got second place place. And Julie is someone that was a pretty decent character. I mean, she was the second highest confessional getter to Rick Devens on the season, so at least there's that. Victoria not being on here, I think, is a travesty. I would personally put Victoria on here, especially over War Dog. I just think this is a bizarre DVD cover because it felt like they went out of their way to not put any Kama member on here in a position where I don't even know why they went with the choices they made. So, again, it's funny that this is the last hurrah of the original DVD covers. But then we then get to IOI, where, as you can tell, they literally just used the tribe photos here, which again probably would have made sense. I mean, like, if this was the format moving forward, which it's not, it would make sense to just put the original starting tribes on the cover. That way you get every person on there. You also get no bias in anything. Again, it makes sense. Yet they just didn't do it until 39 and then never do it again. So even though I personally really liked the original format in terms of it giving us insight on who CBS likes, I did think using this format makes a lot of sense. But I will say, this is a format that I'm specifically surprised that they did for IOI in particular, a season that had Rob and Sandra on it, and you would think that they would want Rob and Sandra on the cover, yet they actually showed the resistance to not do that, which is pretty mind-blowing to me. But again, I still want to run through who I think should be on the cover if they were to do normal format. Obviously, Tommy, as the winner, should be there. I did think Nora should be there. Again, she was one of the bigger characters. I think Janet and Elaine should both be there as these two big fan favorites of the season. And I think Kelly Kim should be there, obviously considering her storyline was such a major one on this season. Now, I think the final spot is a bit contentious here, to where I think there's a number of people that could take that spot. I think you got Dean, obviously runner-up of the season. You got Karishma, who had a big underdog run. You have Lauren, who was also a big player alongside Tommy. So I think any of those three could take the spot. I think my gut tells me to put on Lauren, though, considering the lack of men on this, I could definitely see a world where I would pick Dean instead to just add another guy here, especially considering he's also a finalist. And also add someone from the original Lyro tribe, which is not well represented here either, but I think I would technically rather have Lauren on here. Next up for Winners at War, and again, for the following season, they went back to kind of the Cambodia and All-Star approach of just having everybody on the cover, but again, in more cast photo format instead of a tribe photo like it is in Eye of the Idols. Now here they're obviously separated by men and women, with the women on top, the women on the bottom. Kind of a strange choice considering always the winner has been in the top center, so you would think they would try to put Tony in the top center, not Natalie Anderson, but whatever. I think this is also just kind of fine. Definitely better than what we're about to talk about, so I don't mind this cover, but again, I just want to run through who I would pick for this cover. Obviously, you gotta have Tony. I think Natalie also makes a lot of sense as the runner-up, and also representative for the Edge of Extinction, how important that had on the season. I think you also put in Michelle as another finalist. I think the next three picks are a bit tough, because I think the debate here is, do you go on legacy or do you go on how they performed on the season? Now, I think you would probably put on Sarah Lucina. I think you would still kind of have to put her on, so she to get fourth place. After that, I think it is this debate. Like, if I'm thinking of CBS, I think they would put Ben. I think they would like Ben. I think they would put Ben, which would essentially just make it the top 5 at this point. But I think the last spot is like very contentious. At that point, do you put Boston Rob? Do you put Sandra? Do you put Parvati? Do you put Sophie, had a bigger role on the season? Do you put Adam, who was a big character? Jeremy had a big role. Again, there's just so many options here that I think is pretty rough. If I were to guess from a CBS perspective, I think they would go one of Boston Rob or Sandra. I think they would want one of the two to be on the cover to represent the like big legends of the season. Now, both of them, we've technically seen them go out of their way to put them both on the cover at different points in Survivor history. If I were to guess for this season, I think they would go Rob, especially because Rob's on there till the end. Sandra isn't. Also, Rob would make it balanced gender-wise, and again, I just think they would put Boston Rob on here. Now we move on to the new era, where with the new era, we also got new DVD covers, and guess what? They suck. Where again, I really like the older ones where they focus a lot on the cast, because again, that's what you're actually watching. You're watching the cast. You're not watching Jeff Probst in the middle of a CGI jungle background. So again, I really hate these new covers. I wish they focused on the cast instead, which is what we're going to do, as again, I'm still going to run through these seasons and talk about who I would put on the DVD covers if they still did the original format. So let's start off with 41, where I think obviously you got to have Erica as the winner. I think I would also still have Deshaun as the runner-up. I think you would still have Xander as a big character on the season. So I think the final 3 stay intact. I would not put Heather. I think I would put on Shannon Ricard. Obviously, their storyline was a pretty big one on the season, and Shannon in particular was one of the biggest characters of the season. So again, I think it makes sense to have them. And there's one more spot open. I think it's a debate between Evie and Liana, but I think I would go Evie. I think Evie was a bigger character for more of the season. Now, I could see an argument for putting Danny on here, considering Danny's later appearance on The Challenge, and maybe they're thinking thinking, oh, we can get some people from the challenge to watch Survivor by putting Danny on the cover. But again, I think when it comes to like the actual roles on this season, I feel like I would prefer to put the likes of Evie or the likes of the Sean on this cover over Danny. And with that, we then move on to 42, where I think this one's a bit tough just because I think the Takus really do hog up a lot of the people I would expect to be on the cover, where I think Marianne, Omer, Jonathan, I think are 3 big locks for me, to where that's, again, already most of the cover. I think I would have Drea on, even though I don't personally need Drea on. I feel like, 1, she's a representative from the Blue Tribe, and 2, CBS and production clearly love Drea, to where I think they would put Drea. Mike would obviously be on there as well. I think Mike as a finalist, and also the biggest edit of the season, I think makes a lot of sense. And there's one more spot open, and at this point, it's like, we're not even trying to do tribe diversity, so I don't even think I would really bother with Romeo, considering, again, he was not really the biggest character on there. I think my options would be someone like a Lindsay, who would be the next furthest person to make it through the game. I think you would also consider Hai. I think I would personally go Lindsay. I think at that point, you might as well just go all Taku 4. And that way it also makes it so it's even gender-wise as well. And again, for it to be the Taku 4 plus Drea and Mike, representatives from each of the other 2 tribes, I think it makes a lot of sense to go that route. Next up for 43, and I think this one's a pretty simple one. I think this is one of those where you just go to top 6. I think you have Gabler on there as the winner. Cassidy and Owen were finalists, and both had decently sizable edits in their own right. And the 3 biggest characters of the season were 4th, 5th, and 6th place. We got Jesse, Carla, and Cody. I think this is just the answer. I think you just go top 6. Or I think the only person I would debate is someone like a Noelle. I could definitely see a world where they want Noelle on the cover, and through that, I guess you would swap her out with probably Cassidy, is who I could definitely see CBS swapping her out for. But even then, I don't think it's a necessity. I think at that point, I would just personally go just top 6. I think that makes the most sense to me. Now for 44, which I should mention that at this point, we are essentially caught up on the DVDs of Survivor, where at the time of this recording, Survivor 43 is the last season to get a DVD release. Also meaning that with seasons 44 and 45 supposedly not being planned to be released on DVD as of right now, which is probably the end of DVD releases for Survivor, considering obviously physical media is sadly dying out, to where, because of that, again, there's not DVD covers to even talk about anymore, but again, still continuing on with the video. Time about who I would put on the cover. So for Survivor 44, I mean, I think there's no world where you don't put Tatika 3 on here. I think you gotta have Jam Jam, obviously as the winner, but even then, Carolyn and Carson. My question is, do you put on Bruce? Obviously, Bruce later returns for 45. So again, as a returning player, do you follow that trend, put Bruce on? I don't think so, because again, he's barely there. If he lasted like a full episode, at least there I would maybe argue it, but like, again, he doesn't even last half the episode, so it's like, I can't even put Bruce on here. But again, I think the Tika 3 are pretty solid. After that, I think you're really fighting for a lot of other people. I could see a world where like Matt and Franny make the cover. I could see a world where Danny makes the cover, where Heidi makes the cover. I could see a world where Lauren or Jamie make the cover. I really think it is very up for grabs. I feel like with 3 tribe seasons, they typically like to at least have one person from each of the tribes. Now, again, literally the last time we see this is Edge of Extinction, where they didn't bother. But again, I just think Ratu is just kind of a notable tribe, to where I think if you were to put one person, it'd probably be Lauren, just due to the fact that she made it pretty far. But I do think I would probably put on Danny, Franny, and Heidi as probably the other 3 instead personally. And through that, just kind of leave Ratu out, as again, I just feel like Ratu is just mostly irrelevant to a lot of this season. Next up for Survivor 45, and this one I think you could do in a mostly traditional way, where I think you can kind of even up within tribes and it kind of works. I think you can have the 2 Lulus that made it to the merge in there, and Caleb and Emily, and it would make a lot of sense being 2 major characters on the season. I also feel like you can have the 2 Bellows that made it deep into the game, and Jake and Katura on here, and it would make a lot of sense. Obviously, you would have D as the winner. However, I do think the 6th slot is the one that I'm a bit more up for debate on, where I do think there is an argument for Bruce being on there, obviously a returning player that comes back for this season. Though, obviously, I think you would want another Reba, as obviously that would make it 2-2-2. Also, again, the fact that the Reba 4 dominate this season and would only have one representative would be a bit strange. The question is, who's the other person? Obviously, Austin would make a lot of sense here as the 2nd place finisher, also someone that was in a showmance with D, and through that you would essentially have the top 4 alongside the 2 Lulus, which again I think makes a lot of sense in that being the layout here. Though also at the same time, you know, production loved Drew, and I could see a world where Drew squeezes on. I really feel like the last slot here is one that you could very much debate on. I think I personally would lean towards going Austin, just because it makes more sense that way to have just the top 4 all on the cover, but I think you could go either way, but I think Austin's the route I would go for. And now moving on to Survivor 46, where I do feel like there are a number of ways to approach this cover here. So I do think there are quite a bit of people actually that could make the cover here, but obviously got to start off with Kenzie. obviously the winner is going to be on the cover. Also, I do think you have Charlie, obviously, as the runner-up. I do think they would put Maria as well, especially considering how much of a focus Charlie and Maria as a duo was on this season. Obviously, after that, you got to have Q. I think there's no way Q doesn't make the cover. However, this is, I think, where we get to a bit of a debate. Obviously, the other two members of the top 6 that I have not mentioned yet in Ben and Liz are obviously in consideration, but I also think there's some earlier boots that would be in the conversation. Again, Venus was a pretty big character, could be on the cover. Tiffany obviously was a big character, also won the Yanu 3, could also be on the cover. Hunter was a casual fan favorite, could also be on the cover. Even Tevin is someone that production clearly loves and could be on the cover. I really feel like any of the top 10 could actually genuinely be on the cover here. However, I think the ones that they would actually go with here, I think would be Tiffany, for one. I do think Tiffany, again, making it the Anu 3 all on the cover, I think makes a lot of sense. For a while, that obviously leads to this being a bit of an unbalanced cover here, and the fact that Yanu 3 takes up over half of it, I still feel like it makes a lot of sense to have Tiffany there. And with that, I think I'm going to go with a Nami member for the other pick, considering obviously there's already 2 Sigas here. To where for me, I think I'm actually going to narrow it down to Hunter or Tevin, largely because, again, Hunter is clearly a casual fan favorite and someone that might bring in DVD viewers, while Tevin is someone that is clearly a production favorite. And I think it is a debate between the two. So while I personally would like to have Venus on there, or even Liz, who I also think is a great character, I do think they would choose between the other two. And for the sake of this video, I think they would pick Hunter. Again, Hunter was a fan favorite for this season. I think someone that is more likely to draw in people to buy the DVD. So again, I think for the sake of this video, I think Hunter would probably be the other person I would expect them to pick. But with that, again, that is every season of Survivor, talking about the DVD covers along the way. Going forward, obviously, I'll continue to do Survivor videos down the road. There are other history of videos I'd like to do, the Survivor Hall of Fame being one I already have planned. I have more EDGIC-related ones planned. I recently thought about doing one on just Survivor logos. Again, I think there's some interesting ideas still for down the road, so obviously stay tuned for those whenever they eventually come. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.